So welcome, Elizabeth. I know we have another trainer coming on in Insight that is Jennifer Suzor, who has just joined us. I'm just going to keep admitting people to the room. So this is a wonderful session about bringing insight into the practice of family mediation. And we only have an hour, and we're hoping to have some interaction. And we do have a couple of experts here, Jacinta being our guest speaker, and we're really lucky to have Elizabeth Starrett and Jennifer Suzor here as well. So thank you for joining us. I just want to start out with a land acknowledgement. And really what I'd like us to do is think about making this land acknowledgement personal to us, right? So I'm going to acknowledge the land I'm standing on today is the traditional territory of the many nations, including Mississaugas of the Credit, Anishinaabe, Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I'm really thankful that they are taking care of this land. I love where I am. I'm situated in the world. I'm near the lake. I love the water. I love the trees. And I'm very thankful for all the people and generations who have taken care of this land for thousands of years before us. So I invite you to think about why you're thankful for this land and do your own land acknowledgement. And thank you very much for joining us. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Jacinta Gallant, and welcome to everyone.
Thanks, Marianne. Be wonderful to see faces if you can turn your video screens on. And thank you all for coming. I'm in Prince Edward Island on the traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq Nation, and had the extreme pleasure last week of getting together with other Prince Edward Island people working in the justice system to reimagine family and criminal justice with an Aboriginal and Indigenous focus. It was this most amazing morning that we spent together. So I'm really happy to acknowledge not only the land, but the people who have continued to try and teach us, even when they could be impatient with us, about ways that we can resolve conflict and work towards communities where people can coexist peacefully and we can make friends with one another. So one of the things that I want to share with all of you is, first of all, just a little bit about me. I know many of you, and I really appreciate that many of you have come to this session, even having already taken some extensive training in Insight. I want to really appreciate Cheryl Picard, who is the founder, the creator, the academic, pracademic woman who decided 20 years ago or more to really dive into what's going on, what am I doing when I'm mediating? And was so willing to be vulnerable and be filmed and dive into what's really happening when we experience the challenges of those moments, right? And when we experience the satisfying, sometimes profound shifts as mediators when we're working with people who are engaged in behaviors that are challenging, people who are, particularly in our world, in the family law world, who are really quite like mad at one another. There's a lot of strong emotions. And so welcome to this session where I would love to engage with you as fellow learners on the journey, and also offer, some helpful tips about how I got started, not only learning about Insight, but applying it. And to the point that now I would say that I truly am an Insight practitioner. It's the way I live, it's the way I work. And so welcome. I also want you all to know that if you don't know, Cheryl Picard is a Canadian. Of course, she's from Prince Edward Island, where all the great things start, birthplace of Confederation and all of that. And so know that the way I got started was in 2016, I was kind of tired. I was thinking about my work and happy about the parts that were satisfying, but quite disappointed and in some ways disillusioned with some of the work that I was doing that didn't feel like it was truly delivering on the promise of collaborative and mediation. So I was searching. I was by then fairly experienced, and I would say good teacher on the interest-based process that we all eagerly embraced 30 years ago for some. And then also really was looking for, well, what's going on when that isn't working? Like, what is it that's the problem with, well, now I call it the problem with problem solving. And so I'd like to take an opportunity, probably like 10 minutes, to present on how I see the Insight approach fitting within the model that we as Canadians truly embraced and I think improved. That's the interest-based model. I want to break down some of the simpler starting points for really bringing insight to your practice, because I think I can help. And I want to acknowledge that you, as OAFM, I love that you've decided to embrace insight as a really important method and approach that is going to infuse the way you work as an organization and the way we work as people doing this important work. So there's my overview. So what I'm wondering about, though, is, and it would be great to hear from you, what are the things that you find challenging in the room when you're working as a mediator? What, in some ways, what are the obstacles? What are the things that get in the way of our doing our damn job? What are the things that you've experienced that make it hard for you to deliver as a mediator? Anybody want to chime in? Oh my goodness, are there never any challenges in Ontario? You guys
Yeah,
have
well,
it
it's all
sorted?
easy over here. Yeah. I think sometimes the challenges for me personally and in my mediations are where there's an inability to hear or wish to sort of think about the children's needs in the room, and trying to bring the voice of the child into mediation can be challenging where there's those barriers. I'm lucky in my practice that 80 to 90% are fairly low conflict, and the child's voice is ever present, and I see pictures of the kids, I hear about them, they're very proud of them, they're talking about them a lot. And those smaller percentage of cases where it's very unclear, mom says there's a health issue, with a diabetes diagnosis, for example, where dad is not prepared to take care of these things, and it's a real risk for the child. And
Yeah.
just struggling to get that voice of the child in is something I
Okay, so
hear a lot.
thank you.
And there's a chat too.
There's an educational piece. You, as someone who knows stuff that could help parents, gets frustrated sometimes that it's hard to bring that into the room when people are objecting or are not willing to listen or hear. And then the other part is that whole idea of how do we manage those moments where people are can we just let's call it bad behavior. When people are behaving in a way that seems to be like, I don't care about you, it's destructive, it's obstructive, it's la 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 la, I'm not listening to you, that kind of behavior. Does that ever happen in the Ontario mediation rooms?
Of course.
I'm seeing a few nods. Yeah. And so sometimes when we ask the question, what are the obstacles in the way of us? It's just us. I know that we're recording, but I'm very respectful of the human dimension of the clients that we work with. And the fact is, it can be very difficult for us when we have the role of managing their conflict dynamic when their behaviors get in the way. So in some ways, we could say that one of the big obstacles on the way or on the road to resolution is the behaviors, the things that happen in the room that shut people down or ramp people up. And so I want to ask you to just consider this. What are those behaviors? Without looking at content, what are the behaviors that you see getting in the way of our path to resolution? We've got not listening. What are some others?
Looking for vindication.
So how do they demonstrate that? With words? But what other ways do they behave that tells you they're looking for vindication?
In the chat, there's emotion explosion, which I think is really kind of funny.
So emotion explosion, meaning we are noticing that there's strong emotion. It's sometimes subtle, right? Some of us might pick up on it because we're more intuitive. And often when it gets explosive, it includes what? Sometimes pointing the finger, yelling, shutting down, turning away, interrupting.
We want to fight the fights from 3 years ago, like when you did this and
Yeah, rehashing, bringing back, circling back to the same old. Yes. And so we'll see people interrupting, trying to convince us, the mediator sometimes, convince us of that this is really the way things are, or convincing the other person that they're wrong. And so if you imagine that we all have a story to tell that would include the context that is the type of relationship and what's ending, but also our role. What I want us to look at from a very, very sort of big picture view of insight is that the thing I love about insight is the key beginning skill is learning how to notice these conflict behaviors. And so Cheryl calls them defending or conflict behaviors. And when we notice them and we see them, this is what I want you to consider. So when we notice these behaviors in our clients, what are some of the things that we do that don't help? What are some of the things that we do as the intervener, as the mediator, in the face of these interrupting, challenging, pointing the finger, blaming, reiterating, shutting down, leaning forward?
Well, if you're not articulating what you're observing, if you're not sort of providing that feedback to parties, they may just carry on in the rut of their sort of traditional head-butting relationship.
Yeah, so they might just carry on with this destructive and ineffective way of communicating. Angela,
it's for the clean dishes, please.
unmute.
Sorry, I was trying
Thank
to
you.
I tried to figure out where that noise is coming from. I mean,
Angela, sorry, Angela, did I?
Yeah,
see
some
your
of
hand?
us might try to problem solve.
Yeah. Yep. And sometimes our trainings taught us to call people to their higher level of behavior because we committed to not blaming. We committed to treating each other with respect. We might call out communication guidelines. Yeah. Yeah. And so we might ask people to behave better. And so what I want us to get into right now is this whole idea that, and I'm gonna share some slides, that the problem-solving approach, which is highly helpful, that we were all taught as mediators, and to give a shout out to the Canadians, because I've been teaching around the world for many years, and I know that in Canada, we did take what was offered through the original interest-based approach, and we did expand it to include feelings. Like we did figure out a way to expand the notion of interest to include the psychological stuff that we in family law in particular knew was going on. But the thing is, it's still a problem-solving model. So I want you to just reflect for a minute, those moments when you've been working with a couple and they're ready to look at possibilities. They're ready to explore options. They're willing to consider the needs and concerns of the other person. Have you ever had cases where you get to that point? Yes. And so that feels productive. That feels effective. And I know for me, it feels really good because I feel like I can be very creative and grounded when we're ready to problem solve. And so when I was beginning to look at insight, and I was looking at the unhappy aspects of my work, both in collaborative practice and as a mediator back in 2016, it was the cases where people were constantly resisting the nudge to move forward. They weren't providing the information that they needed. They were complaining, this is taking too long, this is costing too much. Is this a familiar refrain for you? So what happened for me was I'm like, well, okay, so I really feel like I make room for emotion in the room, and the interest-based model, often works. So what's going on when it doesn't work? And the minute I became more engaged in that reflection, I started to really get insight. I see that Suzanne has raised her hand.
Thanks. I was clapping earlier. I got mixed up.
Oh, okay, well, thank you, Suzanne. I
Yeah.
guess you.
I was just going to say, asking closed questions, but really, I think not showing up and being fully present and thinking that it's your job to fix anything. I think
Right.
as mediators, we need to show up fully engaged and create safety and create the space for whatever needs to come up to show up. And sometimes that's emotions. And, that's the thing, letting those be recognized and seen and heard.
So would you all agree that we sometimes feel on the hot seat? We're the one in the middle supposed to manage this crappy or difficult behavior. And we've been taught all kinds of things to do. And there's still moments where it's like, holy, what do we do? So being present can really make a huge difference, but it can be very hard to do if you see your job as someone who's supposed to be moving things along and getting the job done. And so I appreciate your sharing. And I'm going to say that for some of you, you've seen these slides before, but I don't think it's going to hurt because I want to show you how we can begin to understand why it's hard. So is my slide showing? Yeah. Okay. So basically what I want to do is take advantage of this short period of time we have together to see, are there some essential pieces of insight that we can understand by comparing it to the model that we were taught. And so I'm going to say, like, yes, Suzanne, yes to others who know that we have to spend time being present and really curious with our clients. And what do we do when we feel like we also need to get results? So what I want us to look at is the neuroscience of curiosity, because insight is beautifully grounded in curiosity, but also in a really productive targeting of curiosity. What do we get curious about in these moments where behaviors and obstacles get in the way of our work? So look at this slide. Basically, to summarize, the research on curiosity is that if I demonstrate to you a sincere desire to understand you, you are going to experience satisfaction, security, and tension relief. And if you're experiencing a sense of threat, or that I don't really care about you, or that I'm not interested in knowing you, you're going to experience anxiety, fear, and stress in a moment when something really matters to you and that feeling at stake. And so what happens is the neuroscience tells us, and this is the fun fact, that my demonstrating curiosity to you, particularly in these moments where I'm experiencing that conflict, I'm sensing that you're resisting, or I'm sensing that you're getting quite defensive. If I can demonstrate curiosity to you, I'm bringing to you these satisfying, secure, tension relief emotions. But the thing is, it also is visited on me. So curiosity benefits the giver, the person who's showing curiosity, and the receiver. So there's something in it for all of us. The other aspect is that the impact of threat, and our clients can feel threatened at the very level of their identity when they're going through a separation and divorce, is that our clients are experiencing anxiety, fear, and stress. And if you're someone with a mental health background, you know that when we're experiencing a threat, we're getting into a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. We're actually cognitively impaired, and we're not really able to open up. And so it's not like insight is the only approach that takes advantage of really harnessing the power of curiosity, but it takes curiosity and targets our attention as the intervener, as the mediator, into those areas that will be most productive by helping clients understand what is going on for them that's leading them to defend. So in essence, it's harnessing this power. And I like to just throw some blame around for a minute, okay? So I want to just quickly bring us back to the model that we were all, I'm going to guess, all of us in Canada who are family mediators have worked with this model, which can be, again, a great problem-solving model. But the whole idea is that if two people are fighting over a lemon and you spend some time exploring what the needs are in relation to the lemon, you might be able to find a win-win outcome because someone needs the juice, someone needs the peel, maybe someone needs the seeds, and they live somewhere where they can grow a lemon tree. So that being the basis of our focus in the interest-based model, I want to break it down so that we're looking at what are the key principles that inform that model. So the key principles are to separate the people from the problem, focus on interests and oppositions, generate options for mutual gain, and use an objective criteria, right? So we want to find a way to make the lemon cake and the lemonade. And the focus of the interest-based approach is on problem solving. So we want to figure out, well, what is it that these people have as a problem? How can we expand the notion of what's important? How do we find out what matters? How do we get into goals and needs and concerns or even desires? And then we can work there to find some way for these clients to decide that they want a mutual win-win outcome and that the conflict is about the thing. And so the challenge we have is that this is based on an individualist social theory that makes all kinds of assumptions about human behavior and rationality. And it's been my experience that when clients are ready to find solutions and problem solve, what's absent is their emotionally or destructive behaviors, that they're ready to problem solve. And then we can count on them making some rational decisions about maximizing the outcome for everyone in the family. And the challenge is, though, that in mediation and in collaboration, we see repeatedly people who are not ready to get on with it. And the collaborative team or the mediators can feel like, my God, I can think of 10, 15, hell, 20 ways that you could solve this if you would just get over this thing that keeps coming back, these behaviors that get in the way. And so I asked the question, and Cheryl Picard asks this as well. You'll see a lot of this in her book, Practicing Mediation, Insight Mediation, and also in Transforming Conflict Through Insight, breaking down this whole notion of the rational human being who's making decisions based on separating the people from the problem. Again, I'm going to say the people are the problem, and typically they are in a relationship that is the focus of the work that we're doing. So separating them from the problem doesn't work when people are not ready yet emotionally to make decisions. I do find that when people are ready, we can help them focus on interests and understand more about their positions. I've had lots of clients who are like, hell yeah, let's do mutual gain, win-win. Let's do that. I've had lots of cases where people are like, no way, I don't care about them anymore, or I don't care about this yet. And so you've got, like even the example you gave, Marianne, where parents are seemingly unable to take in helpful educational information about what their children might need, when outside of a process where they're feeling threatened and stressed, they might make great decisions as parents. So then we've got one more problem here, and that's use the objective criteria to evaluate options, which is a key principle for the interest-based approach. And I just find that if that were the case, then when clients are left with a problematic decision, we would just tell them, well, here's what the law says, and they'd say, okay, let's do that, right? What's more objective than that? So in fact, look at it, we're working with people who are in a relational conflict. Their relationship is transforming and they may not like it. They may not be ready to look at rational decision-making if they're feeling strongly emotional, and they should be because they're going through a difficult time. And asking them to use an objective criteria to make choices doesn't seem to work. And so I'm going to say our clients are not often ready to make the rational decisions until they are emotionally ready to take that step. And so what Insight does for us, that's so beautiful, is it tells us, well, you know what, sometimes, Cheryl will say this, maybe it's time to problem solve, but actually maybe it's not. And so Cheryl will work hard. She worked hard on me to look at the decisions our clients need to make rather than the problems that they need to solve. What are the decisions that our clients need to make? And we are instructed as the intervener, as the mediator, to begin by noticing behaviors that are getting in the way of productive dialogue. Because as some of you mentioned earlier, the best day at the office for us are those moments when clients want to hear and understand one another, where they really want to care about the other person. And those moments are fabulous. And when clients are there and we're facilitating their dialogue, yay! And there's a lot of moments, at least in my practice, where they're not ready yet. And so we see arguing, debating, yeah, but, interrupting, name calling, expression of emotion that's destructive, shutting down, checking out. And so what I like about Insight is that Cheryl defines conflict in a way that makes sense to me. It's what I see in the room. The conflict emerges when what matters to me feels threatened. and I defend. And then my spouse, my former partner, may experience my defending as threatening something to them, so they defend back. I mean, you've probably seen this in your own work. Sometimes the clients are resisting us, and our attempts to help ramp them up even stronger so that they're even more resisting. And so I'm going to invite you to firstly look at the definition of conflict in the insight approach and see if this resonates with you. So it's an ongoing pattern of defending behaviors, and that it's the behaviors themselves that escalate or calm the conflict. And so this slide helps us look at it as, when you're down here in the gray oval, we're experiencing life. We're experiencing another person to be interacting with us. And I'm going to interpret those words, the behaviors, or what they don't say, or what they don't say, or how they don't behave in a certain way based on my relationship, my worldview. Basically, I'm going to interpret this as me. And so if I interpret something that you're saying or doing to be threatening to something that matters to me, I'm going to defend. And my defending might take the form of interrupting, trying to persuade you to see things differently, trying to educate you, telling will typically be the strategy that I'll use unless I decide to check out completely. And then, so if I interpret something in my meaning making to be threatening to something that matters to me, and if I defend, then if the other person interprets my defending as threatening to something that matters to them, well, they're going to defend back. And then we have conflict. So we've got the classic, an easy way to look at it is the classic argument, right? Someone says this, the other person argues back, argue. This is actually fairly typical of traditional lawyer behavior. Make an argument and debate it and argue about it. So when we look at our job in family mediation as being an important component of it, having the couple themselves hear and understand one another, if we know that my interpretation that something that matters to me is feeling threatened and I defend, if I know that that is the indication that I'm not able to cognitively catch up, I'm not interested in listening and learning anything new, I'm convinced that you're just out to get me, then our interventions as the mediator is different from the way we were taught, which was to move forward with problem solving or try to understand it in terms of some future focus. And so in the insight approach, we're going to engage with the clients differently in the moments where we notice their conflict behaviors. But it really does start here with the assumptions, the meaning making, and the interpretation we give to this particular interaction. How often have you been engaged with someone and you're surprised that they took offense? How often have you noticed your helpful efforts with a client be turned into you just don't get it? In your personal life, how often have you said to someone, oh my God, that's not what I meant, right? So that truly, as human beings, we're constantly missing the boat on interpretation. But with the insight approach, we're asked to notice the behavior first. And if we notice the behavior is defending, we're going to choose to take action that will get at what is feeling threatened that matters so much. So our curiosity goes very specifically to the question of threat. Because if I feel threatened by you, and we're going to see clients experiencing this all the time, I can't listen to you and I can't learn anything new about you. How often have we been with clients who are convinced that their former spouse is just trying to hurt them? And of course, some of these perceptions might be accurate. It's just that the behavior that leads me to defend sends a signal to you as my mediator that I can't listen. I can't learn anything new. My ability to learn can't be re-engaged until I can stop defending. So my ability to learn can be re-engaged when I no longer have to defend. And so to bring it back, the definition of conflict makes a big difference for how we choose to perceive and how we choose to intervene in those moments when our clients are kind of losing it with one another, but also with us. So the other part of the insight approach that's key is this whole idea of threats. And so rather than us making assumptions about what's going on when people are behaving in this obstructive, destructive way, we get curious about, I wonder what's feeling threatened that matters so much. And then thirdly is the way Cheryl describes how we work with values. The things that motivate us to do whatever we do can often be brought down to, what are our values? What matters to me? And so she calls them cares so that it can include what matters to me, both, just a sec. I'm back here. The question of what matters to me that's feeling threatened is the important part of our intervention as the mediators, because people can feel strongly differently about their values and not be in conflict. It's when what matters to me is feeling threatened that I behave in these ways that get in the way of dialogue and listening. And so we want to look at noticing first. So the first thing we do is notice defending behaviors. We talked about it when we first started being together today. And so if you take nothing else out of today's session and you want to dive deeper into insight, begin with noticing. Noticing when people are interrupting, justifying, repeating, yeah, but, withdrawing, pointing their finger, or sometimes even a patronizing, don't worry, it's going to be okay, can be perceived as, you just don't care about me and you don't care to know about me. So you want to notice these behaviors, and that is the time to stop trying to tell, stop trying to educate, inform, guide, correct. It just isn't the time. You save time by noticing the defending behaviors and going, I'm not going to pretend to know what's going on, because if I do that, I'm making assumptions. I'm noticing these behaviors. Okay, now is not the time to tell. I need to get curious. I need to bring the power of curiosity to this moment. And so we start with noticing, because the defending behaviors, these behaviors that I just described, show us that something that matters is feeling threatened. It's not the time to flip it forward to a future-focused interest and begin flip charting and problem solving. It's the time to attend to this moment. What should we be curious about? Well, we want to be curious about what's feeling threatened that matters so much. And we have to truly wonder, how often do we think we know what's going on because we've seen it all before? So we have to truly wonder, I wonder what's feeling threatened that matters so much. And then we want to ask about it. So one of the examples earlier on was talking about transparency. So one of the things that, as an insight mediator, I will do is I'm much more transparent, both about what I'm seeing, what I'm noticing, but also what I see as my role, what I'm going to do as a result of my noticing. I'm going to ask genuinely curious questions, and I'm going to ask about threats. We'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to ask about worries. I'm going to pay attention to, you've probably heard Elizabeth and Jennifer talk about the Cheryl's term, listen to the listener. I'm going to pay attention if I'm in the room with both parties, with both spouses. How are they reacting to one another as I'm engaging in dialogue with maybe one of them or the other? So you're always wanting to be noticing not just the behavior of the person who's demonstrating the obstructive or destructive behavior, but also how the other person's responding. And then we're going to spend a lot more time as insight mediators verifying what it is that people are understanding from what's going on. And so we spend time verifying interpretation. There's a whole interpretation and verification piece. So if I were to summarize where curiosity goes, I start from noticing. I want to notice the behavior that tells me, stop telling, stop trying to educate, stop trying to change anything right now. Now is not the time. This person who's resisting either me or their partner is cognitively impaired. The neuroscience tells us that they're experiencing anxiety, stress, and they really can't open up and listen. So when we notice that behavior, what we don't do is tell or call a communication commitment or tell people to behave differently. By the way, there's all kinds of room for us to have deeper discussions, because in addition to all this other stuff, we're actually also needing to be careful about safety. So put that aside for now. There may be reasons why you do not continue in a conversation when the behaviors are so difficult, but know that for now, what I want us to imagine is those moments where people are behaving and we've already secured the sense that we're okay, that there's safety. Okay, so we want to be curious about, I wonder what's feeling threatened that matters so much. We want to, there's another way, we might be curious, I wonder what meaning they're making of this moment. I wonder what they're interpreting from either what I'm saying or from what the other person is saying. I wonder how they're making meaning right now in this moment. So that's the curiosity around wondering about interpretation and meaning. And the third one is, I wonder if they want to engage. I wonder if they, in this moment, want to engage in dialogue and discussion. So there's a lot of respect to bring to say, just because they chose mediation, in this moment, do they want to engage? Okay, so 3 aspects of targeted curiosity that we can bring in insight. So we want to be asking in the moment. And again, I'm going to say the best way to start is in your one-on-one pre-mediation meetings, so that you're not worried about immediately managing the dialogue and the conflict with the 2 parties in the room. So you want to be asking, what are you most concerned about? What are you worried will happen if you try that schedule? What is it about this proposal that's feeling scary? What concerns do you have about the medication that's been recommended for your child? So what happens for us as really experienced mediators is we sometimes don't ask these questions because we think we know the answer. And so we want to ask, it's not going to be just a cross-examination. It's not just open questions. It's not just closed questions. You want to build it so that there's a conversation as well, but you want to be asking about basically the threat. And so how we do that is really well established in the insight mediation approach, but we don't have time about that today. I want to touch on why you would ask about threats. And then we want to know that the most important part is, just a sec, is knowing when it's not the time for us to tell, when it's not the time for us to advise, guide, educate, or inform. And so if mediation, if insight is something that you're drawn to and you feel like it seems complicated or difficult, know that one of the things that can help is practicing noticing the behaviors and catching yourself when you think you know what's caused it. Noticing your behavior and wondering. You're bringing the power of curiosity, which helps you in that hot seat and the other person, if they experience you, to truly want to know what's going on for them. And what I've experienced is that it's more efficient. It's actually more efficient, so that we're managing up, we're clearing up misinterpretations earlier. We're understanding threats, and sometimes they're real, and we're managing them. Sometimes we're asking about worries and concerns, and the client has to engage their mind and their heart. And I love when they go, I'm not sure, let me, we want the clients to ponder. We want to ask questions that will lead them to engage their heart and their minds so that they can consider rather than react. And so how I got started was just noticing and being curious and catching myself. Oh my God. First, I would catch myself maybe 20% of the time that I made assumptions, that I thought I knew what was going on and I wouldn't ask. And then slowly over the years, I'm better, maybe 50% of the time. But the trick is to use the noticing so that you can then decide what to do, so that you can be responsive to the client in that moment, rather than shifting to problem solving, which tends to lead more resisting. So in a nutshell, what I want to do is give you hope that you can bring this to your practice, and that there are more of us, well, at least two here, Jennifer and Elizabeth, who are working very hard to break this down so that we can begin to apply it. And know that, and Elizabeth and Jennifer, I'd love to hear from you on this. If you don't notice, if you don't start with noticing, then there's nowhere to go. So notice the defending behaviors and know that it's not time to tell, educate, inform, advise, or problem solve. That will save you hours of misery. Jennifer or Elizabeth, do you want to weigh in that this very brief sort of synthesis of what insight is?
Yeah, I'll just share briefly that my big challenge in terms of one defending behavior was explaining
yes.
the defending behavior. That was my big one. So catching when people are just explaining themselves, and then catching when I'm explaining myself. And that was a big one. And I think you're right that, checking and understanding the defending behaviors is definitely a huge part of this. The challenge as a practitioner is knowing where to go next. Something I'm still, actively talking about with Elizabeth just last night, for example. So the concept of noticing, you're right, then where we direct our attention, I think. Elizabeth, you were saying something to me about a switch that was really helpful. I don't know if she's here.
Thanks, Jennifer. Just to take a minute, we were working on this, and Jacinta, thank you so much for. I love what you said in a nutshell. Here we are with insight. One of the things that came to me was that when we're noticing where our clients are and they're defending, that rah 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 that goes on usually and often at the beginning of a mediation. And so I came upon a metaphor talking the train is heading down the track at full speed. You've got both clients defending, and as Augie said, what they did 3 years ago, I remember what you did 3 years ago, and it was no good then, it's no good now. So what happens, the beauty of insight, is that it's like getting off the train and the brakeman pulls the switch and the train goes into the siding. And that's where we are with the quality of the questions that we ask. Those questions really change the complete atmosphere, or have the potential of changing the atmosphere of the whole mediation. And so that's the strength, the power of insight. Once we become familiar with all of the key things that you mentioned, Jacinta, those conflict behaviors, the finding the threat, and then asking the threat-based questions. So when that train is in the siding, that's when we really have the potential to help our clients shift gears. And then they get lemon cake and lemonade. Then there's the potential to have lemon cake and lemonade. So thank you for that slide in particular. I thought that was great.
Well, and thanks to both of you. So here's the cool thing, Jennifer, you and I have talked about this before. Sometimes someone is explaining and sometimes people is persuading. And so you're not always sure, but you always have the chance to notice the reaction to whatever you try to do. And so I'm going to give you an example. So let's say I go to the fridge. Let's say I'm doing this workshop starting 1 o'clock Eastern, and at 12:30 I go to grab my lunch out of the fridge in my office, and my lunch is gone. And I'm like, oh, okay. So right now there is a threat to something that matters to me, in that I need nourishment. I need to have food if I'm going to be able to perform this afternoon in a webinar. I have some needs that need to be met. And I say, Deb, will you please run to the corner and grab me a sandwich because I need it? And she goes, no problem, gone, mischief managed, problem solved. So there's an example of identifying the problem, I need nourishment, and then solving it. No big deal. Okay, I go to the fridge to get my lunch at 12:30. I'm meeting all of you at 1. My lunch is gone. And I'm like, oh my God, here we go again. You know, there's Deb. She's been undermining me for months. I know that she's tired of me getting all this attention. So I immediately attribute the missed lunch to some offensive behavior. I'm insulted, I'm angry, I feel frustrated, and suddenly I'm like, I got to get food to problem solve it, but I'm also mad as hell at this person who I presume is undermining me. Same thing, I still need to eat something, but my interpretation, the meaning that I'm making of my lunch not being in that fridge changes everything. And suddenly I'm angry and frustrated. Okay, another thing. Elizabeth, what I love is, and again, in this nutshell piece is how when you work with Insight, your questions get so much better, like so much better, right? Because it's not just ask questions, it's ask good targeted questions, because we're allowed to actually get into what is the concern, what's the threat. And so let me just give you a few examples. So we want to ask questions that will lead people to ponder. So if I say to you, what did you have for breakfast this morning? You'll have an answer. Don't answer, but what did you have for breakfast this morning? Okay. So then I might ask this question instead. What do you love about breakfast, about that time of day? Okay. So what's the difference? Both questions about breakfast. Which one's more interesting? Okay. So I might say, what color is your front door? And you're going to say blue, black, brown, white. Okay. And I'm looking for information, maybe. Or I might say, hey, what went into your thinking when you chose that color for your front door? Okay. So often we'll go from someone objecting, arguing, it can't possibly be this. And because we're trained to problem solve, we can forget to ask the dumb question. What are you worried will happen if this takes longer than you hoped? What concerns you most about this pension thing? What are you worried will happen if, I like this one. What are you worried will happen if you're not able to reach an agreement that feels fair? Because so often people will say, I just want it to be fair. And we think of fair as a 4-letter word because our training is to problem solve. So when people say, I just want it to be fair, you're just not being fair. If you use our interest-based approach, we don't have anywhere to go with it except to say, well, there's a difference between what you think is fair and what you think is fair and blah, blah, blah. So, but what Insight invites us to wonder about is, and I'm going to use the words, what Insight invites me to wonder about is, why do they care if it's fair? Right? Like, why do they care if it's fair? Means I can ask, what are you worried will happen if you two cannot reach an agreement that seems fair? Do you see how they have to think? And they're going to tend to, again, not intending to manipulate at all, right? Insight is the last thing beyond manipulation. But my curiosity is, oh, here we go, fair, arguing. Before I studied Insight, all I could do was go like, oh, well, let's hope we can get there. It's a nice word, yay. But now it's like, why do they care if it's fair? And their responses will typically be something at that relational level. I want to be able to show up for our kids' milestone events and not hate you. I want to make sure that I don't resent you as we, raise raise grandchildren. And it's not manipulating people. I truly say, what are you worried will happen if you're not able to reach an agreement that feels fair? Then the other piece you can do with fairness is the flip side. What do you hope will be better in your life if you two are able to reach an agreement that feels fair to both of you? So the questions are trying to get at a deeper understanding of what's the motivator, what are the values that are underpinning the decisions that they need to make without us shifting immediately into problem solving. So that's why I say, like, Cheryl, my God, she submitted to all this scrutiny, and it's a huge gift to us so that we can begin to go, I wonder, in these moments of conflict where typically I used to be trying to go like, I wonder how we can get them to shut up and behave. Now I'm curious, I wonder what's feeling threatened that matters so much. Or this is my thinking, I wonder what meaning they're making of this thing. And so there's actually very, very concrete lessons that come from insight about how you would ask about interpretation. I will say to Joe, what are you understanding from what Jean is saying right now? And then Joe says, here's what I'm understanding. They usually get it wrong. And then I say, Jean, is that it? Is there more that you want Joe to understand? Usually, yes. Okay, try again. And this time, doesn't matter. Joe, I know it's hard to listen, but listen for something you haven't heard before. So because every suggestion, every intervention that comes through an insight approach is deeply embedded in how do people come to learn what they know? How do we as humans learn anything? So that our curiosity is, what meaning are they making from all of this? Including when they're defending against me, which I don't know about you, but I have clients that get defensive with me too. Yeah, does that ever happen? Okay, and the curiosity is, what meaning are they making of this moment? And because in my mind, I'm like, it doesn't make any sense. Why are they so upset about all of this? So I'm going to ask something like this. When you got that text that you're complaining about, right? So they're complaining about this text. When you received that text, what message did you take from it? So I want them to be talking about what are they understanding from this moment so that the other person can hear, oh, that's what you took from it. And I'd be like, is that what you intended? Sometimes they'll say, well, yeah, I guess so, but I realize now that it wasn't I didn't really mean it. I was just being mean, is the one way. Or, God, that's not the way I intended it at all. Can I try again? And so because our curiosity goes to what meaning are they making, we'll ask better questions. We'll ask them to begin to understand one another better, rather than worrying about whether we've got it right. We want them to do the work of interpreting and expressing what it is that they're understanding from one another. So we are curious about the threat that's creating the defending behavior, especially in those arguments. We get curious about the meaning that they're making. What is the interpretation you're giving to this thing that you guys are arguing about? And is that the meaning you want her to take from this? If not, try again. Please listen. So the work is very much between them. It's such a relief. I swear to God, I have so much less pressure to be the one that's making everything happen all the time. And then I'm curious about what is motivating these people to choose this friggin' mediation process anyway. So I'm going to be curious about, what are you hoping will be better in your life? It could be that big if you're able to have a productive discussion about this. So insight invites us to ask questions. That one's called the hope question, that will help us understand, do you even want to engage? It's so respectful. So I might say to clients, okay, you're in the middle of an argument and I'm noticing that your voices are raising and you both seem really frustrated. Do I have that right? they're usually going to go, yeah, okay. So you have some choices to make here, but let me think about this. What are you hoping will be better, like in your life, if you're able to have a productive discussion about this right now? So that they get to decide, is there something they hope is better? And if so, do they want to participate in continuing this dialogue? They'll almost always want to, by the way. But if they don't, then we as the insight mediator can make a much better decision about what to do next, which might be call a break, which might be end the meeting. But it respects the client's ability to either open up and learn, which they might get to, or it recognizes that they're incapable of it right now because of their defending. So we're going to do something different. So I feel so much more confident that I'm making a decision about what to do next because my curiosity goes to the threat that's creating the problematic behavior. And I'm so much better at not assuming I know what's going on. I'm going to be curious about the meaning that they're making, right? That's like the lunch. Someone else might walk in and say, it's just your lunch. Let me get you a sandwich. And suddenly they don't know why I'm going crazy about the fact that Deb took my lunch. So I'm going to be curious about the meaning, the interpretation that people are giving to this moment. And I'm going to be curious about, do they want to engage? Do they want to engage at all? Usually they do, but it's, do you want to engage in a productive dialogue? And if so, what do you hope will be better as a result? So insight really does offer us like quick ways to apply the learning. The challenge is, and I'm going to have to, the challenge is accepting that it's deep enough, and Jennifer and Elizabeth, hopefully you'll agree with me, it's deep enough and it's so valuable to us, like the role that we play by taking the pressure off us to be solving it all the time and to be focused on moving forward all the time, knowing that the power of curiosity calms, good questions cause people to ponder, and our noticing lets us be more efficient. If people are reacting, defending, arguing, doing all those behaviors, it's just not the time to try and make something happen. It's the time to begin to understand the threat that's causing the defending behavior and to be curious about interpretation. And do they want to engage? So it respects the human beings that are engaged in this challenging moment, and it respects us that really we've been sold this task of problem solving all the time that doesn't tend to work when people are really feeling strongly. Oh, questions or comments? It's hard to do it in an hour, right?
For sure. Please feel free to unmute if you want to weigh in. We've just got a last couple of minutes on thinking about
Question.
yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes,
Yeah,
Rick.
Rick?
So my question is, it seems to me, and I've had some experience with this, limited, but that it at the outset kind of requires a bit of education of clients. And it seems to me, I think you were suggesting this, or if not encouraging it, that we build that into the intake process, which to me makes lots of sense, and put less time and effort on trying to understand their particular details of how they've perceived the conflict, and more about educating how the process is going to play itself out when they come to joint mediation. So in other words, a little bit of spinning out articulating what the theory of conflict is from an insight point of view, so that they understand what's taking place then in a joint mediation.
When we adopt that approach, Rick, we naturally change the types of questions we ask because our curiosity is going to a more productive place. So yes, and describing your role as an insight practitioner is different from describing your role when you're doing more of the interest-based mediation. And the other part is that Cheryl will say, we start with truly understanding the client rather than figuring out how to solve the problem. And that's why the beginning of an insight mediation process is asking the hope question. What are you hoping will be better in your life? That broadly, if you're able to have a productive dialogue, so that our focus is on how could productive discussions help you have a better life? So we start with instead of listing problems and gathering all the information, we look at what are you hoping will be better. Not to flip everything into a positive focus, but to truly understand what's motivating them to engage in mediation to begin with. So I'm really clear about my role, Rick, very clear what my role is. And also, I'm very clear about the skills that I will use. So I will explain interpretation and verification, that I'm going to use this thing where I'm asking you to, and I said, sometimes it'll be awkward, but so there's a way to explain. I'm more transparent about what I'm doing, and I'm more transparent about what it means to ask about threats in the moment of argument, so that people aren't thrown off.
And just to follow up if I can, because I think it's a much more comfortable approach, but where the resistance seems to me can still come in, the barrier to engagement may have more to do with people's refusal to acknowledge their own behaviors, because it's a threat to their ego, essentially. It's a threat to their sense of self. And so you can explain this to people, you can have them talk and listen and repeat something to make sure they're hearing correctly. But in my limited experience with this, my preliminary sense, at least, is that one of the great barriers is still people's ego defenses, to acknowledge that, in fact, they've had a role to play in why things have gone as bad as they have.
Right, and we want them to discover it, because it won't help to tell them anyway. I've stopped doing that. So what Insight does so effectively is, when you establish your role with the clients and you start from this approach, then they really do go with you when you're with both parties. Like, it's actually, and if they don't, we notice, and their threat to ego, identity, what it means to be a competent, capable parent, what it means to be a good coworker, I don't know, all those threats to what you're describing, we want to understand them rather than trying to change anyone. And so I don't find people resist me nearly as much, because it's so much about, what are you hoping will be better if you can have a discussion? And if you don't want to have a discussion, I'm like, okay, let's do something different. But for the most part, it's the respect to the human beings that are in the room who have this challenging moment in their time, that if we start from hello with Insight, we have so much to work with. So I feel more comfortable making decisions about doing separate meetings in the middle of a process, because my noticing is giving me provable evidence of what can or can't happen. If there's defending, there's no listening, there's no learning, and I don't stick around for that. And that, I think, is the most beautiful thing. If we can just look at the efficiency of this approach, that all the challenges we've described, that Elizabeth sees in intergenerational and other aspects, and that Jennifer sees, like, honestly, we're really trying to find ways to synthesize how you get going with this approach, because once you get going with it and you use noticing and curiosity, it's irresistible. You just have so much more fun.
Yeah, I tend to think so.
So I want to say this, that I think, Jennifer and Elizabeth, aren't you doing something December 8th? Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
Sure, we have just a day. So Jacinta had the enormous challenge of just trying to cram a lot into 1 hour. And we do a day twice a year, just for those who want to we want to focus on some of the skills Jacinta identified, but it's like the approach and just a little bit more time to sort of delve into some of the key skills. So it's for people who might have been exposed, or people who just are new and want to understand more. And that's December 8th.
And so what I've been doing too has been really exciting. This will be my 4th year with a comprehensive Insight, really an advanced mediation training called the Curious Mediator. Jennifer did it with me last year. It's starting in February. It's 45 hours. And we have people from around the world learning this and going like, oh my God, I wish I'd known this 20 or 30 years ago. And so if you need that to really entice you, I'm going to just say that this seems to be working culturally and linguistically I've worked with like people in 10 different countries and 3 different languages. And so it is really worth pursuing. So get that exposure. I'm doing the Curious Mediator starting February 13th. I do an Insight learning group, which is 5 sessions, like once a week. We have one coming up in March. Jennifer, you're doing a lot of your family mediation now is grounded in Insight as well.
Yeah. I just got rid of the interest. I'm finishing, like, not even mentioning it anymore, shifting just to being based on Insight. And that's been a journey.
Sure. And
it's
so
been a big journey.
We're going ahead of you, and I was lucky enough that Cheryl Picard retired from Carleton and came to PEI and mentored me for a year. Like, I got such direct feedback, and I know, Elizabeth, you had a lot of that when she was in Ottawa, but I want you to know that I did that for you. So we've gone ahead to try and really figure it out, and I'm still working with Cheryl all the time on how do we distill this so that people can learn it. But know that what's so abiding about it is it's based on learning theory, right? How do we come to know what we know? And how can we come to know things that aren't actually true? And then also relational, it's a relational social theory. So it's built into this approach that we're working with people who are in relationship. This individualistic notion, it's not a surprise it came from the originals out of Harvard. That Canadians, like, we did such a great job changing it up, but
we're going to keep going too, Jacinta. We have, of course, every Wednesday, the third Wednesday of the month, we have Insight Matters, and December 20th, Cheryl Picard is going to be our guest. Yeah. And people who've been joining have received her paper, Exploring Expected Futures. So please join us on December 20th, when Cheryl will be our guest on Insight Matters.
And I just want to say too, for Jacinta's Curious Mediator course, there's a lot of collaborative, I call them collaborative folk, but collaborative professionals there too. And a lot of people here do mediation and collaborative. And this is an approach Jacinta's really brought into the collaborative realm as well. So it's a nice format for meeting people from other places, other jurisdictions. I think there's so much richness to that when you're learning. So I just wanted to give that. It was an excellent learning opportunity.
Thanks. And I put my website in the chat, but we really want this to be a proud Canadian thing. I mean, Cheryl deserves so much credit. And I hope that you will all dive more deeply into it. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have after this session ends.
And actually Lonergan too, right? Lonergan was
there's so much, he's Canadian, but like there's so much to this, people, but you do not have to read any of Bernard Lonergan's theory of insight in order to be able to practice this, right? Thank God.
Shout out to Canadians.
Yeah, let's be proud Canadians.
That's true. In the chat, there are links to Elizabeth's and Jennifer's training, Jacinta's website, as she said. I put it in there. December 20th will be a really fun Insight Matters with Dr. Cheryl Picard. I also put the Exploring Expected Futures article in there. So if you haven't got it already, it'll come out with the next ad reminding you to log in on December 20th, Wednesday. The ad goes out at 8 in the morning to remind you, and a few times before then. So please join us that day. It's going to be a really nice holiday themed probably by that time.
Hey.
Yeah. But I'd love to see.
I'm having a beer with Cheryl next week, so I'll tell her that everybody's really excited.
Yeah. Wonderful. Please join us. And so thank you very, very much for spending your time with us today, Jacinta, and for all of your contributions today. There were a lot of members here showing up. I know we've gone a little bit past 2:09, so I hope we haven't eaten too much into the rest of your day. And I loved what Jacinta said about saying hello with insight. I'm going to say goodbye with insight and hope that you have a lovely day. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you.